DAP has been very critical of Pekmore, Taib Mahmud and GPS. The Chinese Sarawakians have always viewed DAP as, we want you to be our voice as check and balance in parliament. If Abang Jo shows a good state leadership, do we really need that strong of a check and balance in the state? Hello guys, welcome back to the Are We OK podcast, the podcast that talks about public policies and politics in ways that are accessible to you guys, the man and the woman on the street, and maybe even some children as well. My name is Ken Ming, OKM or Mr. Botak, and here with me
is Mr. Money.
Hey Peter, maybe can I ask you right off the bat, have you been keeping up with the Olympic news since we're in the Olympic season?
Oh yeah, I was just discussing this with my wife. Definitely not like last time. I remember last time when it was everything was an ad on TV3. Everything. We used to follow it a lot. These days because Netflix, everything, right? So we rarely follow it. But what I've been doing is just keeping track with highlights and also the results. But it's hard to keep track on like what's happening in Malaysia, except the badminton because badminton we are performing very well,
Yep.
So then a lot of highlight involves Malaysian team, but many other highlights doesn't really have Malaysians involved so
correct,
far.
yeah. So I mean, good news. We have 4 entries into the quarterfinals. The men's doubles, men's singles. I think by the time we hear this should be true already. Alicia, and then also mixed doubles and then women's doubles. So 4 chances for quarterfinals, and then maybe. Touch wood, 4 chances to go into the semis, and then we'll
4
see
goals.
what happens. I think one would make Malaysia very, very happy.
Yeah, that's right.
And also make the whoever wins that goal very happy from a financial rewards
Oh
perspective.
yeah, how much was the reward again?
I think too much to count already, because a lot of private sector have come in to say, I give you an apartment, I give you cash and this and that.
Yeah.
So
I remember it was in millions. Yeah.
Yes, definitely in the millions, and I'm sure that person will be set for life. A bit like Joseph Schooling in Singapore, right?
Yes, that's right. That's
set
right.
for life already. So yeah, I mean, apart from the Olympics, anything else that's new?
For me, I recently just brought in an assistant. For the first time in my life, I have a PA per se.
Okay. How does that feel?
I have to say that things has become much more productive, but at the same time also it becomes very packed. So every moment you are in an important meeting, because people can start squeezing in a lot of stuff.
Yes,
so every moment you are just making decision. It becomes very sick to a schedule. So it's sometimes I feel a little bit impersonal, because you're just coming in for 15 minutes, talk to me, I make a decision.
But the part about efficiency is correct lah.
Yeah, it's very efficient. It's a bit scary. It makes you also realize that like why certain CEOs also have a driver. Because today we went out for a shoot. So my team actually drove the car. And in that car, throughout the whole journey, me and my assistant was just planning for my day and my week.
Yes.
Yeah, so I realized that it can be quite mentally exhausting.
Yes, because there's different decisions on who to meet at what time and things like that.
Yeah.
So
good thing is it relieves you of thinking too much.
Correct.
Just make the right decision anytime.
Yeah, so I had a lot of practice on this when I was a member of parliament and then later deputy minister. Of course, we had people helping me out, but I will be quite active in terms of managing my schedule. So you got to manage your constituency schedule, and then your ministerial schedules, your party schedules as well. Party means the political party, not go and party. Yeah. So now that I'm no longer in frontline politics, even though the schedule is still quite busy, I'm able to manage on my own for now. But still, like you say, take some time, can take away some energy and so on and so forth.
Let's get down to the topic of today's.
I want to go into some of the comments from the previous episode, and this is sort of like the first segment. With regards to the issue of the donation or the charity drive by beer or alcohol companies, namely in this case is Tiger. And I think not just from the comments, but also from some of my discussions with some Malay friends, this is an issue where I really can see it's like a cultural divide.
Yeah.
Both sides certain of their own positions and very hard to find a middle ground. So I'll read you some comments. This one is by Arman GSK, and the comment goes like this: it's not an issue of halal or haram, it's an issue of influence to the next generation, right? So if based on the logic by OKM, then tobacco and vape companies should be allowed to donate and advertise their logo for all of these fundraising charity events. For this matter, got a thank pass for bringing up this issue, even though the intent was to score political points. Another comment was, if the Chinese want to promote alcoholism to their kids, be my guest. I have got no issue. Right? So I think these are both probably Malay or at least, probably Muslim viewers. I respect where they're coming from. But to me, because I think people who just look at the check, they see tiger there, and then people politicize the fact that the Malay MP for Sepang was there. So that started the whole controversy. I think she and her staff should have been more careful in terms of, attending these events and telling the organizers whether or not the MP should be there with the tiger logo. But put that aside, I think most of my Malay friends would never have gone to such a charity and fundraising event before, right? In schools or outside schools. I think for them, it's like once they see the logo, it's like, oh, you're promoting alcohol in schools. Whereas I think for people, like us and those who are familiar with going to these kinds of charity events, right? It is normal in the sense that these things usually take place in the evening when school is over. Sometimes weekends when there are actually very few school kids around. In fact, the only school kids who come for these events are the ones where the parents actually bring them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's this kind of event, right, has very little in terms of promoting logo or whatever to the school children itself. And I think what many people don't realize is that the people who attend these events are usually the parents, the PIPG, adults, who attend these events, and they've been doing this for many, many years. And it's not just a case of, this beer company, Tiger, is coming in to give money. Usually these events, these charity events, will be ones where, you have other organizations, Sinchu will come in or another paper, they will also contribute, and then there will be singers coming in to perform for free. And then the parents and other supporters who attend those events will also give donations to the schools, right? It's sort of like a really charity kind of atmosphere. Yes, of course, if you want to purchase beer, you can go ahead. You can do it within that context. And it's something that's part and parcel of the kind of Chinese school ecosystem. That's why I think a lot of my Malay friends cannot understand this. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think the idea is that many of them have not been to such events. So I think for someone like us, if we have been to a Chinese school, then someone is just something that's very normal for us.
Yeah, and it's hard to convey that sense of normality to my Malay friends because for them it'll be like, I do not want to see alcohol feature anywhere in the school. And actually, the truth of the matter is that it's not as if you are hanging the tiger sign in front of the school or in some part of the building, right? It's just the check ceremony. Maybe next time they may not want to put a logo because of these kinds of issues, but it's just one event in the whole calendar year of a lot of other events that takes place. And it's something that for us in the Chinese community that has attended many of these events is quite normal. Yeah. But at the same time, I also understand, some of the Malay friends I have, they are afraid that maybe this can be some sort of a slippery slope. Suddenly alcohol, vape, and all these, sports toto come in or whatever, the gambling companies. I don't think the Chinese schools will go down that path. And it's not fair to make that kind of criticism as well, because the Chinese schools are also quite careful. There's no history of any tobacco companies coming to sponsor these kinds of events in schools, right? As far as you know, right? So to make that jump, and this was something that was said by the UMNO Youth Chief, right? Akmal Saleh, that, now it's okay for alcohol companies, then it's okay for vape and or gambling or cigarette companies to come. No, I mean, the PIPG will exercise their own influence and their own discretion. And it's something that I think is quite uncalled for. But, it really shows to me that our country is very, very divided. And once an issue gets politicized, right, there's no scope for discussion. There's no scope for middle ground kind of understanding, right? So I think this will probably be the last week that this issue is discussed in the press. At least I hope so. And I think all the political parties have made their points clear. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to sort of explain this and also to talk about this kind of cultural divide. Any other thoughts to add?
I think, like you say, cultural divide can be quite tricky. My personal opinion on the matter is that I guess either way, this is something that was never brought up in the past. Or maybe it was brought up, but it was never brought up in this scale. I do not know, right? But how I see it is that, since the fact that it's being brought up, then I guess what happens is that people from different parties not as in political party, but whoever is relevant.
From different communities.
Yeah, from different community, I think I can see that people are like being more sensitive and trying to accommodate. Because after that, I can see a lot of different people issuing statements, talking about it. And you can see the style is generally trying to like, okay, you know what? If
Cool
this
down,
really
is it?
offends you,
Okay.
let's try to do something. I mean, it's kind of like whether or not it offends people, it is not for me to say or anyone to say because we are normalized by it, right? Yeah. So when it happens, then if someone else get offended, then as it's being raised up, then we just work out a solution. Because the truth is, we are a multiracial nation. You just have to come to a point and make a solution. As simple as that.
And I think maybe moving on, probably the nature of these kinds of charity events may change.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether schools will be pressured to exclude alcohol companies from playing a role in these charity events, because that is actually an important source of funding. And also, these companies have the kind of experience to facilitate these kinds of events, right? So we'll see what happens maybe next year when this cycle starts again, especially during times when these kind of charity events are part and parcel of the sort of like activity or landscape. Especially these kinds of activities are especially prevalent closer to Chinese New Year, right? So we'll see whether next year Chinese New Year, whether these kinds of debates happens again. Yeah, interesting way to start off this episode, and I think some food for thought. Try not to comment too much on this. I just wanted to wrap this up. Put a sort of like bow on it. May come up later. When it comes out later in another episode, then we'll talk about it. But yeah, let's try to move on and respect the multicultural and multi-religious society that we live in.
So before we move on, we just want to thank our sponsor for this episode, and that will be Zeus Coffee. How do you like their new chum latte?
The best of both worlds. Got coffee, got tea, chum together. What else can you ask for?
Double the pleasure.
Thanks so much, Zeus Coffee.
Do you always order chum in a restaurant? I usually order chum when I go to a Chinese restaurant.
I'm more of a coffee guy, but if it tastes as good as this, then yeah, definitely will keep this in mind.
All right, so for those of you guys who would like to try it out, go and check out the Zeus Chum Latte.
Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast. This is the second segment, and we're going to talk about a recent conference that took place in KL called TechInAsia. Just to give you guys some context, TechInAsia is sort of like this tech conference or activities, news reports that is usually focused in Singapore and Jakarta, because this is where a lot of the tech investments and money has flowed in the past, whether it's a VC or PE kind of space. But they decided to organize one of these events in KL, and it's the first time that this conference has taken place in KL earlier this month. And this is following up on the, to me, a relatively successful KL 20. Right, so TechInAsia was, this event was also co-hosted by my startup, which is under the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. And the Minister, Chang Lee Kang, was also there as one of the guests. But this time, unlike KL 20, it's much more industry-centric, less of the government and politicians, more of the people who are involved in the tech ecosystem here. Many of whom we know. We both of us didn't attend, but we sort of like caught up with some people on the sidelines and was following social media generally on this. But maybe I can ask you from your perspective, was there any sort of like buzz about this event in the circles that you move around in?
Surprisingly, not so much of promotion. I think maybe there was promotion, but it just didn't reach the most general people.
So the target group mostly was on the sort of like stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Yes, I think there were some people who are invited. It felt more like, instead of a public event, it felt more like by invitation basis.
Yes, because you had to get tickets to actually attend.
That's right. So there wasn't a clear idea of how to actually get it. And number two, because it was quite kind of like, people have this impression that it's in Singapore. Because it's always in Singapore, right? So
Singapore, Jakarta, yeah.
Correct. So there wasn't this like very clear thing that came out and say like, hey, we are in KL this time. So in my mind, right, when the first few times I saw it, right, I kept thinking it's in Singapore. Until like some friends who got invited actually told me, hey, I'm invited to the event, and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, hi, it's here.
Yeah, I think they're quite selective in terms of who they reach out to, because they wanted to keep it, more sort of like intimate among the circle who are moving around, within this tech ecosystem. But I thought it's quite interesting in terms of giving another narrative for Malaysia, because my sense is that many of the people in the VC and PE ecosystem, they find that, okay, we know Singapore, we know Indonesia quite well, and maybe some of the markets there are already quite mature, ideas maybe, plateauing. So now, maybe Malaysia is the next hot ticket in town. Right, because of all these semiconductor activities, data centers. And I thought it's quite interesting, not just to situate this particular conference, but to look at some of the other moves and also other announcements that may potentially excite the startup ecosystem here in Malaysia. VC, and then maybe on later PE activity, the funding ecosystem, which includes, for example, the announcement by KWAP for a Dana Pemacu. Right, this was reported in Deal Street Asia, and basically KWAP providing 6 billion ringgit on co-GP programs. These are general partners to come and partner with local guys, and this is a bit similar to what Penjana Capital was trying to do, but I think much more specific in terms of the asset classes that they want to invest in. The three that have been identified are infrastructure, real estate, as well as private equity, right? And 4 GPs will be selected in each asset class, each receiving about 500 million ringgit, and then selecting a local GP as a partner as well. So I think is a good sort of like catalyst to the larger investment ecosystem in Malaysia. And I think this is also in conjunction with the announcement recently by Khazanah that they've completed the merger between MAVCAP and Penjana Capital, right? So, hopefully there will be an announcement in the relatively near term in terms of the new mandate for this merged entity, because one of the reasons why they wanted to merge these two entities was so that we could have greater scale and also more firepower among these government agencies. So, generally interesting moves for us to observe.
Right. So before we move on, right, maybe you want to explain to people what is actually a co-GP.
So a GP is sort of like a general partner that will deploy funds to the people in the PE and the VC ecosystem. And the reason why I think this Penjana and then now Pemacu under KWAP wants this kind of partnership is so that we can build local capacity in the GP ecosystem. And then hopefully it can filter down to the value added that they bring into the picture in the investee companies that they eventually will invest in.
So co-GP basically is like at the moment company, let's say when you put up the fund, then our side will match it, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So what happens is that, for example, if let's say you're overseas GP or whatever not, overseas PE fund, you come into Malaysia, you select a local PE fund and then you say, hey, I want to work with you. Then you want to put in 500 million, then they are going to match that same amount there, so that this pool right now has 1 billion instead of 500 million. So this has been a very common practice in Malaysia over the years, right? In order to attract VCs to come into Malaysia, investment and come into Malaysia in the startup scene.
I think this is necessary in the Malaysian context because our market otherwise doesn't have that much action. Unlike in Singapore, where you actually you don't really need this kind of co-GPs ecosystem.
That's right.
Because there are enough funds that are trying to deploy within the ecosystem. There's probably too much money floating around. That's why they use Singapore as a base to deploy their funding to other places in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Indonesia. The reason why I think this model needs to be done here in Malaysia is because we just don't have the local expertise. So when you say co-GP, the idea is whichever foreign GP comes into Malaysia with this kind of investment proposition, they will bring in certain expertise. Let's say, I know I can teach you how I've invested in the infrastructure or the real estate ecosystem overseas. What are the ways in which I do valuation? I look for deals, and then some of it can be used in the Malaysian context. And then you having seen the way I do things, had this kind of exposure to my staff, to my people. I'm talking about from the perspective of a foreign GP. Hopefully that will also filter through, and then you would also gain this kind of knowledge. And it's almost like a technology transfer.
Yeah. So it's an investment knowledge transfer. But I have a question, right? To put it there, actually I have one question I want to ask, because generally this co-GP fund that they're talking about, which is very similar last time, they're talking about infrastructure, they're talking about real estate, then they're talking about distributing it to PE, right? Which one thing that my question generally is this, right? You're talking about 3 different sectors that are generally quite a mature play. Yeah, number 1, infrastructure. I mean, you can't be a startup to play that. Number 2, real estate. Again, you can't be a startup to play that generally. And PE. PE generally invests in mature companies again.
Yeah, more mature companies.
So it seems like the money, right, is just playing around to invest in mature industry. But isn't it the point of this all was to invest in, to support the early stage startups? And that's something that's happening quite a lot in like Singapore, in other countries, but even in Vietnam, right? Yeah, but in Malaysia, it seems like people are just unwilling to pull the trigger to invest in early stage startups.
Yeah, so I think there are a few reasons for that. Firstly, the ticket size that many of these companies are looking to invest in, probably too big for startups in Malaysia. When you're talking about, I want to invest, 5 to 10 million US dollars as a start, I'm not sure whether we have those companies, that can provide that kind of value proposition, right? So that's why. The default would be to invest in more mature companies.
Right.
I think the second sort of like a challenge that these companies have to invest in the local scene, right, is that the Malaysian market sometimes is also seen as a bit too small, right?
That's right.
So to be able to scale up, you actually need to go into Southeast Asia, right? And not that many players probably are confident enough to do that. We see some Malaysian players that have grown big enough, they've tried to go into Indonesia and then they've had to, pay some school fees, get burned, spend some money, right? So, if let's say these GPs have that kind of appetite, then good. Then they would be able to have a longer term horizon to invest. But if let's say they are a little bit more scared, then, again, that would be a limitation. But I think what is interesting is that at least KWAP is thinking more creatively. When you say those sectors are mature, it is true. But we don't really see many new ideas in those sectors, right? So when you talk about real estate play, is it possible that they will try to invest in ways that can bring technology into these sectors, whether it's, let's say, co-working spaces or industrial parks, for example, right? So I think that kind of space, there's room for innovation even in mature companies and mature areas. But maybe just one more thing I want to bring up, which is a very interesting announcement by one of the leading semiconductor companies in Malaysia called Vitrox, based in Penang. They started out doing in the visual inspections ecosystem, and I think they've branched out into other related areas as well. And they've partnered up with Southern Capital, which is a Malaysia and Singapore-based private equity entity, to come up with a 150 million ringgit tech fund. Right. So the reason why I want to bring this up is because I think a couple of reasons. If let's say this leads to investments in the semiconductor space, and it's a space that's quite wide, there's different areas that you can invest in, including investing in maybe not so much early venture, but not necessarily mature, but companies that need that little bit of a boost.
Series A kind of thing. Right?
Yes, maybe even, yeah. So around that kind of growth trajectory, that would be interesting because, as you know, a lot of the PE guys in Malaysia, they're investing in very well-known kind of sectors.
Yeah.
Right, retail, real estate, fintech that's also quite safe, so to speak, but very little action in the semiconductor space, right? So as Malaysia has made its aspirations known, wanting to have this national semiconductor strategy, wanting to be sort of like a data center hub, wanting to up the game in our semiconductor space to move up the value chain, it will be interesting to see how this particular fund will work, and also whether it can spur the development of other related funds, because, and this is the second point I want to make, there's a lot of money floating around in Penang right now because of the booming semiconductor ecosystem. And I know that some of these bosses, some of these CEOs who have made money through listings and other kinds of ventures, they are also looking to invest. Right? If let's say they can structure it in this kind of fund, then it can spur more activity on the funding side, and then also on the value proposition side in terms of the startup ecosystem.
That's why I was bringing that up, right? Because Malaysia now currently we are talking a lot about becoming a semiconductor hub, and there were a lot of good articles that were written about it. Even foreign articles that say that, hey, Malaysia, if we play the cards right, we could be the next Taiwan, right? Yeah. Now, when I was looking at this TechInAsia, right, I was actually expecting a lot more announcement regarding funds that will go into this area. And because we have so many semiconductor companies in here right now and so on, there is a huge amount of supply chain that can be built up and capacity. So I was just wondering, I thought that should be the main focus.
Yeah, but I think because it's the first time that they're doing it in Malaysia,
right.
And there's no sort of like government mandate, for these kinds of supporting funding initiatives, unlike KL20. That's why I think we didn't see that kind of announcement, which I think is actually okay at this point in time, because you need these guys to understand and familiarize themselves with the Malaysian market first before they can try to invest more.
Right. So do you foresee that in future the government will probably come out with more policies that's orientated towards this direction?
Yeah, so we're still waiting for the details of how the funding is going to come for the National Semiconductor Strategy. I think that would be an important thing that the semiconductors industry will look at. We'll also look at, I think people will also be looking at some of the activities with regards to these IC design centers that has been announced, one in Selangor, one in Penang. Again, we're not quite sure about what the funding details are. But I think these are good sparks that can catalyze the larger ecosystem in Malaysia. And with KWAP, with this Cambrian fund that was announced by Vitrox as well as Southern Capital, I'm cautiously optimistic. Yeah. And maybe if, let's say, we can get the ecosystem right for the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone, there can be funding elements that may come in for the semiconductor sector, and maybe the larger startup ecosystem as well in southern Johor.
Right. So can I say that if I'm a person who's trying to pay attention to the policy making of this nation when it comes to the tech sector, and as a business person as well, that should be the news that I want to pay attention to, because that will lead to a lot of sparks of the relevant fundings and activities that will come behind. And it will be marketed much more strongly by then. Yeah,
definitely a sector that I would be paying a lot of attention to because it's important catalyst for the Malaysian economy, and I'm sure many people in the investment ecosystem would also try to interpret the different signals that are being sent by the government, and also the implications of these kinds of funds from different sources, whether it's private, government, or some of the government-linked investment companies.
Right. In terms of MIDA, because you are a MIDA director, right?
Yeah, I'm a board member.
From last episode. What is MIDA's involvement in all this? I mean, you don't have to tell us exactly like the secret stuff, but yeah. Like, what is the role of MIDA generally?
Not so much, I think, at this point in time in the sort of like startup space, but in terms of trying to create an ecosystem whereby, for example, if we are going to get a lot of these FDI flows in different sectors of the economy, including in the semiconductor space, what can the government do more of, including MIDA, to put in the incentives so that there's greater localization? Right? If, let's say, there's a greater effort to do more localization, including matchmaking between local companies and some of these large investors coming in different sectors of the economy, then that can be a catalyst for the local players to be plugged into these supply chains. And then maybe through invoices that they can get as a result of businesses with these MNCs, they will be able to take that and ask people to invest in their companies, right? And maybe they, through this supply chain integration, they would also know what are some of the global trends that they need to follow up on in terms of being able to not just get this customer base, but also expand the customer base to other countries and other companies as well. So yeah, hope that was useful in giving you a picture of this ecosystem. We'll come back, talk about Sarawak and Abang Jo. Be right back. Welcome back to the third segment of this episode on the Are We OK podcast, where we're going to talk about Sarawak and also our Premier Abang Jo's recent interview on Keluar Sekejap that came very close to Sarawak Day on the 22nd of July. Before I share my views, maybe from your perspective,
I thought it was a very good interview actually. Yeah, I can see a side of a very different side of Sarawak that last time we don't see. A very bold Sarawak, a Sarawak that reclaims its right.
very assertive.
Yeah, very assertive. Yeah, and but they're also very careful with the narrative, and they're also quite annoyed with the narrative. To be honest,
Which part? Careful and annoyed. Which
especially
part?
about the part where like they're careful is how they say it. The annoyed part is relevant because a lot of people are saying that, hey, are you trying to ask for more because now you are kind of like the kingmaker in the political place? Then Abang Jo has been re-emphasizing that no, it's not. It is, we are reclaiming what was originally promised. Now, thanks to my sejarah, back in those days, I had a good sejarah teacher that made things quite interesting. So I do remember MA 63. Yeah, and I don't remember all the details of it, but yes, not too wrong. Definitely a lot of things about reclaiming. Right, which lead me to one question at the point when I was listening to the whole thing. And I was quite impressed by his chemical knowledge, the other part.
I'm talking about the hydrogen economy.
I was like, oh, not bad,
Yeah,
you know
hydrogen and then NH3, ammonia.
That's right, yeah. And we were just having this kind of discussion the last round as well. Now, the part that raised a question within me was, if it's a reclaim, which is true, why last time don't claim? Why now only claim? Now, nonetheless, he also gave me an impression, at least in that interview, was when he talked about decentralizing the power and how he's trying to empower the people underneath him to actually develop Sarawak. And I thought it was a pretty good strategy if implemented well, because it's a very big state. And if you want to centralize it, it's going to be very difficult. Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's well implemented, then I think it could really benefit the people. But again, the biggest question is still, your predecessor wouldn't have worked on the claiming of it? Like, what went wrong there?
Yeah, so I think a few things. Firstly, the reclaiming of MA 63, basically boils down to the starting point of asserting that Sabah and Sarawak are not equal to the individual states in Peninsular Malaysia.
Yep.
Right, and I think this is, again, like you said, historical documentation, historical fact, that Sabah, Sarawak and Singapore joined Malaya to form Malaysia in 1963.
That's right.
Right. So when they had the constitutional amendment, when I was still in Parliament, to restore the position of Sabah and Sarawak as equal entities to Peninsular Malaysia. So that is the starting point for the negotiations, right? The other things that was brought up by Abang Jo, especially with regards to dealing with Petronas and then also the Petroleum Development Act versus their own ordinances in Sarawak.
Yeah.
I think that is part and parcel of a negotiation process that started after 2020 because of the Sheraton move and also because of opportunities for Sarawak to use its strategic political position, right? Which I think in the past, number one, they did not have because UMNO was much stronger at the time. Number two, like you rightly said, Abang Jo's predecessor, the Taib Mahmud, people know him as Pek Mo, the late Taib Mahmud, was focused basically on controlling Sarawak and governing the state in his own unique way,
Right.
which has been the subject of much news and discussion. Right, so that the reclaiming part was not his priority. So I think this is the thing that I think differentiates Abang Jo from his predecessor. And I think he's trying to capture the mood and the sentiment of Sarawakians of wanting to have this Sarawak for Sarawakians kind of sentiment.
Actually, after I listened to that interview, right, I thought to myself, if there's a state that I want to migrate to in Malaysia, it's either Johor or Sarawak.
Okay. Why Johor and why Sarawak?
Johor, again, because of the Karan Agong, right?
Okay, okay.
And it's also the Sultan there, right?
Yes.
Who has a very interesting development plans.
How about Sarawak?
Sarawak will be what he said there. I like one fact that, I mean, all these are just over interview I hear lah, right? Yeah. But if let's say whatever he said is true, one thing that he and implemented well, one thing he said that really captured my attention was when he talked about the education part. He said that we want to maintain the part of within the rights of perlembagaan to actually have both Bahasa and English, and to make Sarawak much more international. Because if you can make Sarawakians to compete at the global stage rather than a local kampong stage, don't be a jago kampong, should be the best in the world. And when he said that, he did not just say, he followed up with the plans of the hydrogen economy, green energy plan, and what are his thoughts about it. Okay, definitely very surface, it comes out implementation, but it's enough to get you excited to ask more questions.
And also, he emphasized his desire to want to make higher education free.
That's right.
For Sarawakians.
Yeah.
Right, as part and parcel of his vision.
That's right.
So to me, the articulation of that vision is one that's very compelling. And of course, the policies on the hydrogen economy in terms of whether it makes sense economically, those still have to be worked out. But at least the vision and the direction is there, which is why the Singapore government takes the Sarawakian government very seriously. Abang Jo, whenever he goes to Sarawak, gets a very good engagement with the Singapore government. And also why I think people in the federal government is also paying attention to Sarawak for pushing the envelope on many policies. And I'm sure the Ministry of Finance is taking a very keen interest, because if there's going to be any impact in terms of Petronas's revenues, it will definitely hit the bottom line of Petronas and the ability of Petronas to be able to pay good dividends to the federal government.
For those of you who do not know, Sarawak is actually our largest natural gas producer, right?
Yes, of course, Petronas is an international company, so it has revenue sources from all over the world, but definitely Sarawak will be a very important part, I just wanted to sort of draw from this kind of vision and policy to relate this to the politics of Sarawak. Because in Sarawak, politics and policy usually, are intertwined, as in many other places as well. But, one of the things that made a little bit of news after the interview with Abang Jo was some of the reactions of the politicians in Sarawak, including some of my, DAP friends. Because there was one sort of throwaway line that Abang Jo, gave in his KS interview when Khairi asked him, you are working with some of these parties in the federal government that are not necessarily together with you in the state government, right? He was talking about basically DAP and PKR.
Yeah.
Right? So for him, it's very clear. Whatever happens at federal is federal. Whatever happens at state is state. At the state level. And then there was this throwaway line where, he said something like, does PKR and DAP even exist in Sarawak? Adakah mereka wujud di sini, right? So it's sort of
troll a bit.
Yeah, troll, and it's a little bit of a sort of trying to assert your dominance, so to speak. And that elicited some responses from the PKR and also DAP political representatives in Sarawak. One of the two aduns, Violet Yong from DAP, used that to ask Abang Jo not to be so arrogant, because DAP reps were democratically elected by the people of, mainly in Kuching. And then PKR said, maybe a bit more measured statement, the state chief there, Abun Sui, if I'm not mistaken, to say that, look, it is true that we may not be so influential, but there are still ways that we can play our own part. Right? And I think the larger question here that, namely DAP and PKR has to answer for itself, right, is what kind of role does it want to play vis-a-vis GPS in the state government versus the federal? And to draw you behind the curtain a bit.
So now after I hear this, I know whether I want to migrate there or not in the future.
So it's quite clear if you look at the federal ministers, right, let's say from DAP and also from PKR, they are trying to build a good relationship with GPS at the federal level, and also going down to the state. Hannah Yeoh, has offered to see whether some of the events for the 2027 SEA Games can be hosted by Sarawak, because they have upgraded their facilities. They're holding Sukma this year. Anthony Lok, I think, has also made some moves to shift the ownership of or the management of the Bintulu Port Authority from federal to to state.
Yep.
So you can see all these moves, and of course Sarawak is quite happy with that. But at the same time, you have a situation where at the state level, you still have two DAP aduns. One is Chong Chen Jin, who's the DAP state chief in Sarawak, and then another one is Violet Yong, who are still taking a very adversarial stance vis-a-vis GPS in Sarawak. And I think they themselves see themselves as a check and balance on the Sarawak state government, right? So you have this duality, if you will. The challenge, I think, and maybe I focus more on DAP here since I know it better. For DAP, the Sarawakians, especially the Chinese Sarawakians, have always viewed DAP as, we want you to be our voice as check and balance in Parliament. Because we want check and balance against the Barisan at that time. At the state level, we're actually quite okay with GPS because they take care of the state quite well. Only when things on corruption became a little bit heated under Taib Mahmud, that was when DAP was at the height of its power, or the height of its representation rather, with 11 state seats. Yep. Now it's gone down to 2. Right? So will the Sarawak DAP supporters have the same kind of mentality that they had before 2018 moving forward? Meaning, if Abang Jo shows a good sort of state leadership, do we really need that strong of a check and balance in the state? Especially if, let's say, the quality of the check and balance may be, I think, a bit slipping at the state level, right? So I keep track of this quite closely. In the past, DAP has been very critical of Pekmore, of Taib Mahmud and GPS, and some of the DAP supporters have been sort of said, hey, how come you are maybe not such a strong check and balance anymore at the state government, especially dealing with some of the things that you've said in the past, vis-a-vis Taib Mahmud. So you see that kind of toning down at the state level. And then at the federal level, you're part of government already, you're together with BN and GPS. Is the same kind of check and balance kind of motivation at the federal level still there?
Yeah.
Right. So then,
there's a question there.
So I think, that's why the next state elections in Sarawak, which is due by 2026, will be quite important to the extent of how does DAP try to position itself, right?
So here's where I think it's really interesting, right? Because all the points you've mentioned just now, which led me to the question of at the federal level, everyone is trying to be friends with Sarawak at this point. Yeah, every party is trying to be friends with Sarawak. Let's put it this way, right? Even overseas or what, be friends with Sarawak right now, right? They're gonna be the international airport, deep sea port, right? Yeah.
Kingmaker.
And they, if they start to own their natural resources, they're gonna play a very important role economically as well, and a lot of independence, autonomy, and stuff. So it's a state that you must be aware of, right? Let's just put it that way. Then, at the individual level within the state itself, like what you mentioned, if let's say the federal level, they are not supporting it, then how do the state level players are going to play, right, in different party? And my personal thought is this, right, is one thing they highlighted, very correct one, which is the quality of check and balance. I think at this point, if the quality of check and balance is just going to be all shouting matches, then nobody will care. But if let's say right now, right, if there are good aduns that are within there, or other good representative within there who's willing to put in the work and build inroads and real relationship and don't bother about catching the limelight or whatever, that is when you will build a strong power there. Yeah.
So let me just elaborate a little bit more on this because I think it's an important topic. One of the things that I discussed with some of the DAP and also federal leaders, the DAP state leaders in Sarawak and also some of the federal leaders is to say that, look, what makes DAP distinct in this ecosystem is that we have a presence in Sarawak and Sabah. Yes, they have certain level of autonomy there, but we are also a national party, meaning that there are linkages at the government level, especially since we are in federal government now, that could be beneficial to the Sarawak state government.
That's right.
And I'll give you a few examples. Sarawak started their own Digital Economy Corporation, SDAC, and they've also started their own Sarawak investment, sort of like a investment corporation similar to MIDA but at the state level. They are very willing and open to learn from the two most successful states in terms of their own state investment promotion agencies, meaning Penang and Selangor.
Yeah.
And both those governments, DAP
That's
has
right.
a strong role to play. And in fact, when Sarawak hosted the WCIT, the World Congress on IT, for the second time, in consecutive years, the Chief Minister of Penang, Chow Kon Yao, was there, attended, and he was given very good treatment by Abang Jo because he could see that Penang is a good collaborator and partner.
Oh, yeah.
So if let's say, at the state level, DAP tries to do that pivot to say, look, we can be good bridge builders to Peninsular Malaysia,
That's right.
right? To the state government and also to the federal government.
That's right. And industry as well.
Yes. Don't you think that would be a much stronger value proposition, not just to the voter base, but in Sarawak, but also the Sarawak state government, including
That's right.
GPS?
That's right. I totally agree. I think that is where whoever want to be their good friend, right? Actually, right now should go in and offer expertise and really help, right? And really do solid work, not bothering about fighting, or like whether you're arrogant or not arrogant, because that's irrelevant already. Yeah, just really go down there, be a good representative of Peninsular Malaysia.
Yes, because if you think about it, remember I said the national value proposition of being a check and balance for DAP, right, is no longer present because we're in government already at the federal level.
Correct.
So the narrative at the federal level is to see how we can
Correct.
govern well.
Yes.
Right? So for you to have state a vision of being a check and balance with only two aduns and probably not likely to grow anymore, it is very difficult to jive with what's happening at the federal level. So if let's say you can work together with the same narrative of wanting to build better ties with GPS, then that should be the narrative that you should also be working on to bring new ideas, new thinking, new forms of collaboration and cooperation, including with industry, into Sarawak. Right? But I think with the current setup in Sarawak with the DAP, and it's something that I've said in the Kelas Kejap podcast that the recent episode that I was at, many leaders still have that kind of opposition mindset.
From a business standpoint, in my opinion, actually it makes a lot of sense for Penang or whoever state which has a lot of semiconductor industry in it to actually make a good relationship with Sarawak. Because what those industry need a lot is actually energy. And Sarawak is full of it.
Yeah, data centers and other things. And there are certain sort of like skills development that can be undertaken together.
That's right.
Abang Jo also wants to build a semiconductor industry in
and
Sarawak.
they need the talent to go there to actually transfer knowledge. And this is where, if let's say there's a data center that collaborates, goes there, supplies, and is green enough, green energy, good play. I mean, we all know data center, one of the issues is too much of energy use. And it fits right into a narrative, and you can bring in engineers there. It will build a very, very good relationship that right now, if I were to survey that with you, something is at stake.
Yeah, so I think without that kind of strategic mandate from the party, meaning my party, DAP, and without the right people, let's say in Penang or Selangor, to be able to build those relationships, right? That is just a mere talk at our level. And I think also probably one last note on this. It is much easier to come up with sort of like news grabbing sound bites that can get you short-term public attention to, let's say respond to Abang Jo and say X, Y, and Z, than to do the harder work of trying to understand what is the semiconductor or what is the green energy ecosystem, not just in Sarawak, but in Malaysia and also internationally, and to do the kind of thinking that allows you to position yourself as somebody who can facilitate more engagement in this area. That one is much harder. Of course, for me, this is something that I would gladly do if I was in that position. But maybe others, they may not be so well equipped to do the same. So yeah, I mean, let us know what you think about this discussion on Sarawak and on politics and policy. I would love to hear from you, especially those Sarawakians who are either living or working in Malaysia and Singapore, in Peninsular Malaysia and Singapore, or some of the listeners that are listening in from Sarawak as well. So we'll be right back to talk about the final thing in this episode, which is the second 5G network. Be right back. Okay, welcome back to the final segment of this podcast, where we'll be talking about the award of the second 5G network.
Yes.
And I've written and spoken a lot about this issue in other contexts, but I just wanted to bring up this couple of recent articles that I've read with regards to this particular issue. 3, in fact, that have... It's not coordinated, I think, not on the part of these people, but the consistent message being sent out is the second 5G network has the possibility of affecting the performance of the first 5G network. Right, so for those of you who may not know, Malaysia has one of the fastest 5G deployment in the world, and also the 5G speeds verified by Ookla is top 3 in the world. This is for outdoor. Indoor is another question. A lot of credit has got to go to Digital National Berhad, DNB, government entity, 100% owned by Ministry of Finance, that has spearheaded the sort of like rollout of 5G through the single wholesale network model, which the spectrum is currently owned by DNB. Right, so now there's MCMC is taking bids for a second network. It's likely that some of the big boys like Celcom DG and Maxis, maybe together with partners, will bid for the second network. The technical details, I won't go into it today, but I'll just read you some of the comments. First one is, dual network could become profit-driven duopoly, economist warns. This is Dr. Goh Lim Thai saying that it could result in a return to slower services at higher prices. So what he's basically trying to say is that once you have a second network coming in, and if let's say the first network, DNB, is effectively privatized, meaning MOF exits and one or two of the telcos currently own DNB through the shareholder agreement, will take it over, and then you basically have let's say a duopoly. For the sake of argument, one is controlled by Celcom DG, another one is controlled by, let's say, Maxis. Then you have a situation where it's back to two operators, so to speak, the two dominant ones in Malaysia. Yep. And then they would be able to sort of like set prices and maybe not be so efficient in the deployment of indoor 5G, for example, because they want to sweat their 4G assets and things like that. So this is one concern that was expressed. Another concern that was expressed is private 5G network may exacerbate urban-rural divide, says Consumer Group. This is FOMCA President T. Saravanan. Says, a stringent regulatory framework must be drawn up to oblige network providers to cover rural areas, right? So the first 5G network, DNB, they have more than 80% coverage of populated areas, COPA they call it, which basically means most of the urban areas and some of the rural areas that have slightly higher population densities. But for the really rural parts in Sabah, Sarawak, Pahang and all that, they haven't really rolled out the 5G. For those parts, they're still depending on 4G, rollout of Jendela and so on and so forth, right? So I think what this person is saying is that if there's going to be a second network provider coming in, again, this second network provider, very naturally, they will also focus on the urban areas, right? Which means there could be a possible slowdown in the deployment of even the first network to the currently uncovered areas, right? So this is another concern that has been expressed. And then the third one, industry veteran Muhammad Awang Lang suggests that we should stick with the initial 5G deployment. And says, basically arguing that we should have only DNB as the sole 5G network operator, but working together with all of the telcos in terms of making available the 5G spectrum and the services to those telcos, but the telcos don't own that spectrum, right? So I think this is something that we probably should discuss with maybe somebody from DNB or somebody who is well-versed in this ecosystem. But, I think this is a serious issue that I wanted to bring up, and maybe from sort of like a more layman's perspective, what is your reaction when you hear all these responses to the second network?
Well, definitely the duopoly part is where you kind of feel like, will it happen, and stuff like that. Then,
some concerns there, maybe?
Yeah, some concerns there, But there's also the other side of the question where like, would it becoming a profitable network encourage them to actually do more? Yeah, but then there's also like, the question, if it's about the rural area, right, then obviously not that great. Not the great
profitability and all that, right?
So then there's this question about how are they going to implement? Because ultimately, I'm just not good enough to read through all these kind of things, but I don't think there's always a perfect policy. I always think that there's always going to be some sort of gaps, right? The question is that how does the implementation close those gaps?
Yeah, so, for the 5G rollout, I think what is very, very clear, and even, the communications minister, Fahmi Fadil, who at first criticized DNB when he first became communications minister, now he goes to different international arenas and shouts about Malaysia's 5G achievements, even though the policy is actually is something he inherited from the previous government, right? But it's okay. I think the larger narrative of the accomplishments of DNB in rolling out the 5G network, the first one, the current one, I think has shifted a bit, in the sense that the public now also can see the success stories. Of course, there can be more success in terms of enterprise applications, in terms of indoor deployment of 5G and all that kind of stuff. But I think what should be clear is that DNB was set up using something called the cost recovery model, meaning they will charge the telcos what is needed to recover the cost of deploying the 5G networks. This is through Ericsson, the main network equipment provider. And they are not there to make extra normal profits, right? Whereas for the telcos and their listed entities, right, they are there to make money.
Yeah.
Right. So if, let's say, one of them owns the right to operate the second network, they are not going to roll out the 5G deployment and coverage at the same speed as what DNB did. Because for them, it's about how fast I can recoup the cost of investment, right? Which means the 5G deployment of the second network will be slow. And perhaps because you are taking away some of the spectrum from DNB, DNB's own 5G performance will also be affected. And if, let's say, you are thinking of, let's say, setting up your own virtual private 5G network, where you have to decide between the first and second network, you may not want to deploy it. You may not want to deploy or invest in your private 5G network because, number one, the bandwidth may be slower because you have two entities now. And then number two, which do you choose? Right? Second network, which may be a bit slow. First network, okay, can, but the policy ecosystem there is still not very certain because of uncertainties with regards to the second network. From my discussion with some industry people, the whole second network value proposition, especially given the policy uncertainty, terms and conditions of what the second network should entail and how it should compete or complement what DNB has already done is all very unclear because it's not public.
That's right.
Right. So yeah, it's something that I think, even though it's a very niche and technical area, it has impact in terms of the larger telco ecosystem. And just one last response that I want to get from you. Have you been to places where suddenly you find that the 4G network sucks? Doesn't matter which telco provider, right?
Yeah. And even within PJ itself.
Yes. And this is the telcos making certain, calculations in terms of their ROI, in terms of where they want to deploy their telco towers. And of course, they are not going to maximize coverage for everyone because they also have to look at the ROI. And the same thing will happen when it comes to 5G deployment if it's done by one of the telcos, right?
So all this leads me to only one question, right? It doesn't really address the issue of why they want to have this second one.
Correct.
Because it almost feels like, why are you fixing something that is not really broken?
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah. So like literally and because I do not have enough technical knowledge in this area, right, it just remains as the number one question to be answered.
And I think you're not alone. So maybe you guys out there who knows better can fill us in on the comments. And I hope to be able to engage with some of the people who can give us the technical explanation, but in a way that's accessible to you guys, because this is what our program is all about. And hopefully we can all be more enlightened with regards to what is a good way of deploying a second network, if at all it is necessary. So thanks so much for sticking around with us all the way until the end. Hope you've been educated and exposed on some of the areas that we've been talking about. And thanks so much for your support. We are almost to 21,000 subscribers now.
Yes.
Yeah. And if there are any other topics that you want us to discuss, please put in the comments below. I'll just have one caveat here, which is I'm still waiting for the details of this licensing arrangement for these social media and other platforms.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic.
So we'll talk about that at, probably next week. And then maybe at the end of the Olympic Games, I think we should have a session just to wrap up what we feel the Olympic Games have been in terms of the organizers and also Malaysia's own performance.
Yep.
So thank you, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.